Scary telling. When I was 8 years old, I was faced with an impossible choice. My mother sat me down and told me she was either going to kill herself or kill my dad, and I had to choose which one. I remember feeling terrified and confused. How could I choose between my parents? My mother was struggling with severe depression and substance abuse, and her mental state was deteriorating rapidly. My father was often away on business trips, and I had no one to turn to for help. As the days passed, I tried my best to keep my mother stable. I would tell her how much I loved her and tried to distract her with games and activities. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. One night, I woke up to the sound of my mother's voice. She was arguing with someone, but I couldn't see anyone in the room with her. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. The argument continued, and I could hear my mother becoming more and more agitated. Suddenly, my mother's voice was replaced by a deep, guttural growl. I sat frozen in fear as the growling continued, and then there was a loud crash. I slowly made my way to my mother's room, my heart pounding in my chest. As I entered the room, I saw my mother lying on the ground, her eyes rolled back in her head. And standing over her was a dark, shadowy figure. I screamed for help, but no one came. The figure slowly turned its gaze towards me, and I could feel its cold, malevolent energy. I knew I had to get out of there, so I ran as fast as I could. The next morning, I learned that my mother had died by suicide. I was devastated, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something supernatural had been involved. I started seeing the shadowy figure more and more, and I knew it was coming for me. I became obsessed with the paranormal, reading every book and article I could find. I learned about the shadow people, malevolent entities that feed on negative emotions and can cause mental and physical harm. I was convinced that the figure I had seen was a shadow person, and that it was after me. I moved away from my childhood home, hoping to escape the entity's grasp. But no matter where I went, it followed me. I saw it in my dreams, in the shadows of the night, and even during the day. I felt like I was losing my mind, and I didn't know how to make it stop. One day, I met a man who claimed to be a psychic. He told me that he could help me get rid of the shadow person, but I had to be willing to make a sacrifice. I didn't care what it took, I just wanted to be free of the entity's torment. The psychic performed a ritual, and I could feel the energy in the room shifting. The shadow person appeared in front of us, and I knew this was my chance to defeat it. I closed my eyes and focused all of my energy on banishing the entity from my life. When I opened my eyes, the psychic was gone, and the room was filled with a warm, comforting light. I knew that I had defeated the shadow person, and I felt a weight lifted off of my shoulders. But as I walked outside, I saw the psychic's body lying on the ground, lifeless. And standing over him was a dark, shadowy figure. I realized then that I had made the wrong choice. I had sacrificed the wrong person, and the shadow person was still with me, stronger than ever. When I was about 12, my parents went away for a function, so my brother and I had the house to ourselves. We got pizza and watched movies and had the best day ever, along with our adorable German Shepherd dog. As the night started to set in, we decided to call it a night and head to bed. I shared a room with my brother, and we both fell asleep with our dog at our feet. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like footsteps on our porch. I tried to wake up my brother, but he was fast asleep. The sound continued, growing louder and more persistent. I crept out of bed and walked to the window to investigate. To my horror, I saw a dark figure standing on our porch. It was too dark to see any details, but I could tell that it was human-like. I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. My brother was still sound asleep, and I didn't want to wake him up in case the figure heard us. I kept watching the figure, waiting for it to make a move. But it just stood there, staring up at the window. I don't know how long I watched it, but eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The figure was gone, and everything seemed normal. I tried to brush it off as a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went outside to check the porch, and to my surprise, there was no sign that anyone had been there. The next few days were quiet, and I started to relax a bit. But then I noticed something strange happening next door. The old house that had been empty for years suddenly had new owners. They were an odd couple, always keeping to themselves and never speaking to anyone in the neighborhood. As time passed, strange things started happening around our house. The TV would turn on and off by itself, doors would slam shut, and strange noises could be heard throughout the night. Our dog would bark and growl at the empty space, as if he could see something that we couldn't. I became obsessed with the strange occurrences, and I started to investigate the history of the house next door. I learned that it had been owned by a family who had suffered a tragic fate. The father had gone mad and killed his wife and children before taking his own life. I started to piece things together and realized that the figure I had seen on our porch was connected to the haunted house next door. I knew I had to do something to put an end to the torment. One night, I snuck into the haunted house, determined to confront the entity and put it to rest. As I made my way through the dusty old house, I could feel a presence around me. I heard whispers and footsteps coming from all around, and I knew I was not alone. As I entered the old master bedroom, I saw the figure standing in front of me. It was the father who had committed the terrible crime so many years ago. He was pale and translucent, but I could see the anger and sadness in his eyes. He told me that he was trapped in the house, unable to move on, and that he needed my help to break the curse. I was terrified, but I knew that I had to try to help him. I started to perform a ritual that I had found in my research, and the father began to fade away. As he vanished, the strange occurrences in our house stopped. The TV stayed on, doors stayed open, and the house was silent. But as I left the haunted house, I could feel a chill run down my spine. I knew that the curse had been broken, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the father's spirit was still lingering around. As I walked back to my house, I saw a figure standing on my porch. It was the same dark figure that I had seen that night when my parents were away. This time, I could see its face, and it was the face of the father. I froze in fear as he spoke to me, thanking me for helping him break the curse. He then disappeared into thin air, and I was left standing there, shaken to my core. From that day on, our neighborhood was peaceful and quiet. The haunted house next door was sold, and a new family moved in, unaware of its tragic history. But I knew that the spirits of the past still lingered, and I couldn't help but wonder if they would ever truly be at peace. A neighbor saw my horse grazing on the side of the road and ran off the road, slamming into her and snapping her leg, also he could sue me. He claimed that she ran across the road in front of him and said he injured his neck. Not only was it a stupid lie, my horse was not stupid. I knew that something was not right with this whole situation, but I didn't know just how wrong it would become. The legal battle dragged on for months, draining me both emotionally and financially. As I struggled to keep my farm afloat, strange things started happening. I would hear strange noises at night, and my animals became restless and skittish. At first, I dismissed it all as my imagination, but then I started to see things. One night, as I was walking back to my house, I saw a figure in the distance. It was tall and thin, and seemed to be glowing in the moonlight. I couldn't make out any features, but I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. As I got closer, the figure disappeared into the darkness. I knew then that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. Every shadow seemed to be watching me, every sound seemed to be a threat. My dreams were filled with visions of a ghostly figure, and I would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling as if something was breathing down my neck. Then, one night, I saw the figure again. It was standing in the middle of my pasture, and I could see it more clearly this time. It was a man, but not like any man I had ever seen. His skin was pale and translucent, and his eyes were a deep, dark void. He seemed to be staring straight at me, as if he knew all of my secrets. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in fear, watching as the figure slowly moved towards me. When it was only a few feet away, it stopped and spoke in a voice that was like nails on a chalkboard. "You took something that didn't belong to you," it said. "Now, you will pay the price." I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. But even though I was awake, I could still feel a presence in the room with me. It was as if the ghostly figure had followed me into the waking world. The next morning, I went out to check on my animals, but they were all gone. The barn was empty, and the pastures were deserted. In their place, I found strange symbols etched into the ground, symbols that I didn't recognize. I knew then that the ghostly figure was real, and that he was angry. I had taken something that didn't belong to me, and now I would have to pay the price. I packed up what little I had left and left the farm behind, hoping that I could escape the ghost's wrath. But as I drove away, I could see the figure standing in the distance, watching me with its dark, empty eyes. I knew then that I could never escape the haunting of Willow Creek Farm, and that the ghostly figure would always be waiting for me, ready to exact his revenge. I had just started my new job at a historic hotel in the heart of the city. It was a grand building with a long history, and I was excited to be a part of it. As the night receptionist, I was responsible for checking in guests and handling any issues that arose during my shift. But as I would soon find out, the hotel had its fair share of secrets. One night, a guest came in requesting the last available room in the hotel. It was a room that was rarely used, and I was a bit surprised that anyone would want to stay there. But I obliged, and gave him the key. He was a strange man, tall and lanky with a wild look in his eyes. I felt uneasy around him, but tried to shake off the feeling as I watched him disappear down the hallway. A few hours later, I received a call from the guest in the last room. He said he had heard strange noises and felt like he was being watched. I assured him that it was just an old building settling, and that he was probably just tired from his travels. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Around midnight, the phone rang again. It was the same guest. This time his voice was trembling. He said that he had seen something moving in the shadows, and that he felt like he was being followed. I tried to reassure him, but my own nerves were starting to get the best of me. I decided to go up to the last room and check on him. As I approached the door, I could hear faint whispering on the other side. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked. There was no answer. I tried the key, but it wouldn't turn. It was as if the lock had been jammed from the inside. That's when I heard the scream. I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The screaming continued, growing louder and more intense with each passing moment. I could hear the man begging for help, but there was nothing I could do. It was as if he was trapped in another dimension, beyond my reach. The screaming eventually subsided, replaced by an eerie silence. I called for backup, but by the time the police arrived, it was too late. The last room was empty, the man nowhere to be found. To this day, nobody knows what happened in that last room. Some say it's haunted, cursed by the spirits of those who died within its walls. Others say it's a gateway to another dimension where time and space are twisted and distorted beyond recognition. But one thing is for sure, I'll never forget the last room and the terrible things that happened there. I was a real estate agent looking to sell a property that had been on the market for far too long. The house was located on Blackwood Lane, a quiet street that was mostly deserted. It was a large, imposing mansion that had been abandoned for years. It was said that the previous owner had died in the house and that his ghost still haunted the halls. One day, a family of 4 came to see the house. They seemed interested in the property and asked to see the inside. I warned them about the rumors and the supposed haunting, but they were undeterred. They wanted a fixer-upper, and this house was perfect for their needs. As we entered the house, the atmosphere felt heavy, like a thick fog had descended upon us. The air was stale and musty, and the furniture was old and rotting. The family was excited, though, and began to explore the rooms. As we made our way through the house, we heard strange noises and saw shadows moving in the corners of our eyes. The family decided to split up to explore the house more thoroughly. I remained on the first floor while they went up to the second. After a few minutes, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the second floor. I rushed upstairs to find the family huddled in a corner, trembling with fear. They had seen something, but they couldn't explain what it was. We tried to leave the house, but the doors wouldn't budge. It was like the house was holding us captive. We searched for another way out, but all the windows were locked shut. As the hours ticked by, the family became more and more frightened. They had seen apparitions moving through the house, heard strange whispers, and felt an intense feeling of dread. As the sun began to set, the family began to lose hope. They were trapped in the house with no way out. They had no food or water, and they were too afraid to sleep. The house seemed to have a life of its own, and it was determined to keep them prisoner. After a long, terrifying night, we finally managed to escape the house the next morning. The family never spoke of the experience again, and I never sold that house. It remained abandoned, a place of fear and darkness that no one dared to enter. Blackwood Lane had become a place of legend, a place where the ghosts of the past still roam free.